drinking too much, drugging too much, became addicted to crystal meth, was out all the time, had no self-esteem, and ultimately began waking up in emergency rooms with overdoses and psychotic breaks, and had to be admitted into the hospital a number of times. And, finally doctors were saying, "Are you trying to kill yourself?" Hi, this is Mike Balaban with another episode of BAMMER Tales. Thank you for joining. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like if you like it, and come up with suggestions and ideas for additional episodes if you have any. Today I'm going to take you in a journey into the past to 1999, 25 years ago, when I was 47. I had just returned from a year and a half or two living in Tokyo and working for an investment bank. I was in between jobs in New York City, didn't know what I wanted to do next. Eventually, I would set myself up as an independent advisor, helping businesses go to Asia and set up operations there, and Asian businesses come here. But for the summer of 99, I was kind of a free agent with not much to do. So I took some of my savings. I rented a half share in Fire Island Pines. That means every other weekend, my own room. I spent the summer, much of it out there, which frankly was kind of lonely and boring because I had so much time on my hands. Most people were coming for a weekend and leaving. And what I thought might happen, meeting someone along the water's edge, walking his dog at sunset, and becoming boyfriends, didn't materialize. But one thing that did happen is I met lots of people briefly. And in one of those cases, I was at a birthday pool party for Michael Fearman, a prominent gay disco DJ of the era, around a pool house outdoors on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon at the end of August in 1999. Lots of hot men, people dancing with their flags and their tambourines, and people swimming in the pool on rafts, people seated on steps around the edge of the pool, everybody drinking, some people probably drugging. It's quite a lot of fun. And while I was there with a few friends, I was mostly on my own. And I happened to see this guy around the other side of the pool by himself on a chaise lounge in an alcove. And he was handsome, muscular, blondish. So I walked over, meandered over, and said hello. We chatted for 5 or 10 minutes. The basic story was he was Australian, in New York just for the summer and having a whale of a time. And after we finished chatting, I said, as I tend to in situations like that, "Would you mind if I took a few photos of you?" And he said, "No, be my guest." So I took 3, which will appear here sequentially. And they will just give you an idea of what a hunk he was. Unbeknownst to me, there was a lot more to Stu's story. First of all, he had been a male escort and a cult male model for much of the mid to late 90s, just before I met him. And how that happened was he grew up in a typical Australian household in Melbourne with stern but strict and loving parents. He experienced something that is written about by Alan Downs, a gay psychotherapist, in a book called The Velvet Rage. And it posits that many of us grow up with parents who love us, but they only love us as long as we adhere to their formula for what being a good, loving child is. And the moment we veer from that, if, for example, we told them we were gay, they become unloving and disapproving. And as a result, young boys in that situation never trust that, in fact, their parents really love them for themselves, and they don't feel validated. And that lack of validation breeds a low self-confidence that sometime later in life, when stress happens and things go wrong, can explode and leave them in depression or worse. Stu was experiencing that. And when he got out of high school and started college, he didn't take to it very well. He entered acting school with a lot of the famous Australian actors and made it for a year or two, but didn't stick. I think he went overseas to Sweden for a year of an exchange student program, came back and set himself up as a fitness instructor, and then began going out and working his body and becoming the stud that he was when I met him. And he became quite popular. And he met another hot A-list gay guy, and they became boyfriends. And he was on top of the world, at least he thought he was. Everything was going well. They were popular, going out to all the parties and the discos together, and everyone envying them. And then the boyfriend revealed something. He was secretly a male escort. Well, that caused Stu's self-image to plummet, and he became jealous, and he admitted to his boyfriend that he was jealous. And the boyfriend said, well, why don't you try it? Maybe you'll like it. So, but Stu agreed to do that, and the boyfriend introduced him to some of his easier, older clients who were mostly looking for companionship, not necessarily sex. And so both of them were being an escort and going around town. And then the boyfriend broke up with Stu. And that started him spiraling into the depths, drinking too much, drugging too much, became addicted to crystal meth, was out all the time, had no self-esteem, and ultimately began waking up in emergency rooms with overdoses and psychotic breaks, and had to be admitted into the hospital a number of times. And, finally doctors were saying, are you trying to kill yourself? And on one such trip to England, when he was awakened in a hospital, and the doctors called his parents, who bought a ticket for him and flew him back to Melbourne, where he entered rehab, drug rehab. And while it didn't take right away, he came out and went right back into drugs. Eventually, took about a year and a half, and he was very lucky. Most people in those situations do not prevail, do not emerge sober, but he did. Took a long time, a lot of work, and then he found himself without many friends, no job, really no purpose. All of his friends were still drugging and drinking. And he found himself advising them on how they could break their habit. And he realized, I could be pretty good at this. His experience in it, his patience with them, led him to realize he had a career potentially. So he went back to school, spent about 8 years getting his degrees and certification, set himself up as a sole practitioner, as a sex, drug, and alcohol rehab counselor for LGBTQ patients in Melbourne and then Sydney, and finally joined an LGBT facility in northern Thailand, a high-end rehab house for well-off gay patients, and he headed the gay wing, if you will, which was a tough job. He was constantly having to be the bad guy. And eventually, it wore him down. So eventually pulled away from that, and now he's in Europe, where he works in Berlin as a drug sex rehab counselor. We've remained in touch. He was supposed to stop in New York and see me just before I was leaving to move to San Diego in 2020. He was in LA on his way there, and COVID hit, and he had to turn around and go back to Australia. So we've not seen each other again, but Stuart is doing quite well. Whereas he used to be an all-American young man next door, now he's a gay muscle daddy with tattoos and that whole bearded bear look. Now, I should tell you that Jim French, the photographer who founded Cult Model, had a sense of humor. And when he saw how big built, Stu was, he chose the nickname for him as a gay model of being Dick Huge. And you'll see, you won't actually see because I have to blur out that portion of his anatomy, but you can go on the internet and find it or contact me. In any event, that's Stu's story. That's one of the people I met and was reconnected with 20 years later. There are many others. I'll continue telling stories about them. Thanks for watching. Mike Balaban, BAMMER Tales.